to start with sprinklers because we've got quite a bit of input into that already.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, just if you want to put sprinklers up there, I think everybody knows how we work. We'll go through this and any comments that you make or want to add in, I will ask you to type into the chat and Jis will put it onto the live document as we speak. George, do you want to introduce this question? We're talking about component elements of the sprinkler system.
Yeah, what we're trying to do here is cover both the steer the process so that we recognise that the sprinkler is a complete system, but knowing what the individual products and materials are that go to make that up is an important thing, particularly for maintenance purposes. So this is fantastic. The other thing with this is looking at how each of these elements, what information we might need about each of these elements. So valves, for example, in themselves would have a data requirement in terms of, how do we look at what that valve replacement needs to be in terms of its dimensions or its connection points or whatever. So that's we can draw that out from aligned information about these. So that's the other thing I would say generally is that in terms of guidance and standards and the like, we obviously want to ensure that we're working to standards, and it's a given that the people that are doing the design and the installation need to be competent, and also the maintenance. But what we're trying to do is drill beyond that and say, if there's information in the guidance, can we extract that so that it becomes explicit to somebody that is maintaining that particular sprinkler head at that particular location? Okay, that's it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, Sarah and Joanna got very quickly off the mark and have already added things onto that list. Has anybody, looking again, see that if you've already read it, you'll see there are a few new ones at the end in black. Has anybody else got anything that they think should be added onto that list?
Well, I was just saying something should be taken off. The deflector is a part of the sprinkler. It's you can't remove it, you can't replace it. It's just part of it.
So it's intrinsic. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not something that would be replaced or maintained as of its own right.
No.
Who put that on, Joanna?
I don't know.
Well,
I think it was Joanna. Was it you, Joanna? Would you like to?
No.
No, it was probably me.
No, I'm just asking, obviously, for a comment from you, whoever put it on.
Yeah, don't take it off. Just make a note against it. I'm not challenging at all what Alan's saying there, but if we could just keep it on, we don't want to be taking stuff off yet. The idea of this as well, Alan, is that what we're doing here, we're producing a master list, but then people can consume it in different ways according to what they do. So might it be that you might inspect a deflector?
Yes, you would inspect it to see if it's been bashed or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
in that case, it actually should be on our listing then, shouldn't it, George?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but with that consideration,
you would inspect a sprinkler. I mean, the thing isn't very big. You could hardly look at the sprinkler and not see the deflector. I mean, that's.
I think, Alan, it was me that put it on, because I think when you look at the right term for a sprinkler head, is it a sprinkler head? Is it a deflector head? It's probably worth all of these things just getting the definitions right. That'd be my thought. You'd be absolutely spot on.
Okay. Well, it's a sprinkler, and you'd want to check. You look at the sprinkler to see has anybody bashed it? Has anybody painted it? Is it covered in anything? I mean, does it look in decent condition? And if there's if it's a glass bulb operated sprinkler, is there liquid in the bulb? These doesn't happen very often, but they can get cracked, and then you lose the liquid. And if you've lost the liquid, you haven't got a functioning sprinkler. It won't operate.
Okay, we're going to come actually onto that, I think, in question 1 or 2.
Sorry, for my edification, Alan, is a deflector the same as a sprinkler head?
No, It's just part of it. Like you've got the frame, and then attached to that you have the deflector.
Okay. So what's the sprinkler head?
It's just people call it a sprinkler or a sprinkler head. I don't know why. They're interchangeable, those terms. It's a sprinkler.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else got anything they want to add on to that list?
I just say this is quite a long list. Not all of these things would be in every system. This is for housing, isn't it? So it's unlikely you'd have a diesel pump, for example. But fine. I mean, you possibly.
No, well, no, I
if
think
it's a really big building, you might do. If it's a very big building.
Yeah, I think it's a question of caveating rather than subtracting, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I think no. I think your comment's very relevant. Would you do me a favour? Would you put that in? Just type that into the chat for me.
Sure.
Paul.
Yeah. We'd rather have more information too much information than too little, because there's no such thing as too much.
Paul Wooldridge was wanting to.
Yeah, just to say, I think there's a couple of sort of bullet points down from each of that list. So when we talk about switches and we talk about alarms, whether we want a motorized bell, etc., I think there's some deviation from each one of those on the list, so that list will grow. But I think it's fairly comprehensive as an opening list.
Great.
Okay, is anybody got? If nobody's got anything else to add on to that, let's move down to the next bit. The next section. Are there any dependencies on other systems? We've got generator systems, electrical, fire alarm interfaces, sump, ventilation, spacing in open plan offices, water supply, and dry system gas supply. Anybody got anything to add to that or to qualify that?
Yes, again, I think under the standard that we're using in the UK, 9251, you don't, unless I've got this wrong, it's changed, but normally you don't have a dry system. You'd have those in places where you're expecting a risk of frost. So in housing, you wouldn't normally have the risk of frost. I mean, all your other water would be freezing up too, if that were a concern. Yeah, I mean, it says open plan offices. That's fine, but is this about what is this? Is this about housing? Yes,
it's housing.
No.
It's not.
It's not housing.
Because then I could say an awful lot about warehouses and factories, and is that relevant? I don't know.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do here is do something for the golden thread, and the golden thread is involving high risk buildings, but also, and those buildings could include
they can have a hotel in them or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like mixed use. I looked at it from the basis of mixed use, because I mean, I work for Mesa. Most of the stuff we do, I mean, it's got resi, it's got commercial, it's got cinemas, we've done battery power stations. It's a mixture of all of it.
Right.
So, and I think that was one of the big questions the early adopters, Alan, was that the HSC sort of said, how do you deal with mixed use developments? Or how don't we deal with them? You could say in some respects as well. So.
Something that comes up a lot in standards meetings, I can tell you.
Yeah, no, I can believe it, because we've got some diesel pumps on buildings by the fact that they've actually got one's got an undersized generator, which I won't talk about because people have missed out TB210. But it's just that you look at it all and you go, there's like a mixture of all of it coming up. So
you're right. Yeah, if you've got a backup power supply, then how is that done? Yeah, things like that.
Okay. Richard.
Right. Okay. So, has anybody got anything that they want to add on to this listing? Any other dependencies? Right. I'm going to take that as a no, and move down. I've got a list down the right hand side of my screen of 11 people in this meeting. Is that correct, Gister?
Yeah.
It is correct. Right, okay. Right, if we can go to question 1A. What risk does a sprinkler system mitigate? It's quite a comprehensive listing we've got there from people already.
Can I just explain what we're trying to do here?
Yes.
So when we were asked to do this for the health and safety executive, what they've been clear about is that they want us to look at things through the prism of not the individual assets themselves, but the specific risk that that particular asset is mitigating. So what this is intended to do is to really look across the piece at what the risks are. What risk does a fire door protect against, an AOV, etc. And what I was very interested in is looking at what we've got here from sprinklers, because in many cases, the other asset types that we've been working with are fairly standard, that we've got things, but sprinklers are slightly different. So I'm finding this extremely helpful. The second thing that we're doing with this is also relating it through to, we've got another working group in GTI that's looking to map risks against Uniclass. So the objective of that is that we can therefore start to arrive at a standardized set of risks with underlying them the detail, because then we can start to look at standardized solutions to those standardized risks. So that's where we're going with it. Good.
That's
Okay, so
a little bit like a duplication of the work of BS991. Are you familiar with that standard? That's exactly the kind of discussions we have in there.
No, but probably some of the people that we're working with are going. So that's BS991.
It's a code of practice for fire protection in residential buildings, or fire safety in residential buildings.
Yeah.
And so, yes, the interaction of AOVs, alarms, and sprinklers, and all those other fire doors and so on, passive fire protection is all considered. It's been out. I think it was first published in 2011, and it's out for DPC at the moment for the next edition.
Okay. Is there anybody else on this meeting familiar with that?
No.
Yeah, I am, George. Yeah, me.
Yeah. It's quite telling, though, isn't it, that we've got, you know, people like Paul and Sarah Stevenson Jones and, you know, other people who are very active in the whole fire area. If they're not familiar with it,
sorry,
then
I couldn't find the mute button quick enough. But yes, it's a recognised standard for design, not so much for retrofit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But what I think we need to do is, Alan, is to try and interpret from that the basic, you know, the headlines, as it were, that we can do. Because what we find is that, what I find as a layperson, is the alphabet soup of all the different standards, and you go to one standard and then that refers you to another standard and then another one and another one. And it's very difficult to navigate your way through it. Whereas if somebody's maybe a maintenance engineer that is simply looking to address a particular issue, or if you're a building safety manager, for example, you need to know the information you need, then having something that's curated from that is going to be really important. And that's what I'm hoping we can try and achieve with these things.
Okay, so anybody got anything to add to that listing?
Yeah, on the second point, I think it should read reduces fire spread as well as that of smoke, CO2, other pollutants that are triggered within a fire.
Okay, can you add that in, Jess?
Actually, Paul, could you do me a favour? Could you just type that into your chat?
Yeah, sure.
Then we'll get it right then, and just can copy it over if you don't mind.
Cool.
Fantastic. Anybody else got anything they want to add into there? Pauline. Hi.
It looks as if it covers everything. I can't see anything else that I would add to that list.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to consider that list closed and move down onto question 1B, which is, to what risks are sprinkler systems themselves somebody say that for me. Thank you.
Susceptible.
Easy to say.
All right, you've all proved you can say it. So question 1B. We've got quite a lot down there. Anybody got anything to add to that?
I was told recently, I'm trying to think who told me, but they were saying that they did they were involved in one where the valve had been turned off when people thought that it was switched on, and it had actually been off for about 6 months and nobody picked up on it.
That is, you know, where we have any data on this, the most common cause of failure for a sprinkler system is it just being turned off.
Yeah.
Human error.
Yeah.
You know, we
We've
mess
not
around.
actually got
all
that
this
on
other
there,
list,
actually, have we?
all of the rest of the list is not as important as the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should we actually have human
Yeah.
error in there,
Yeah.
actually,
Well,
as a point?
if you know the risk is it being turned off, then what's the thing you check?
It's turned on. Yeah. Oh, I like it. Like it, Alan.
I think the explanation for it was that the particular valve that had been used actually was different in terms of how it was organized than other valves. So does that make any sense to anybody?
I mean, I don't know the circumstances here, but if it's, say, a block of flats, you might have a valve in the hallway outside each flat so you can isolate a flat. You might do. And of course, if you shut one of those off, you might not notice it.
Yeah.
If that's what it was. I mean, if it's a valve where the pump is, that's very easy to see.
Yeah.
I think the other point is when you replace something, if you don't replace like for like, a different model comes in and it works slightly differently to the one before it.
That's a good point. Yeah. Could you make a note? Joe, I'm going to ask you to do what Richard always asks you to do. Could you just,
I would.
you put your head above the parapet there?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, it also means we get the exact right wording rather than put any interpretation on it. Anybody else got anything they want to add in there? I'm going to take that as a no. We're going to move down to question 2 then.
Excuse me.
Which is all about information. What information is needed about sprinkler systems to ensure they perform as required? We've got a basic start there.
Can I just explain?
Sorry, George, do you want to have a chat about it first?
Yeah, what we're trying to achieve here is we're you know, part of what we do is BIM. You know, that's the whole point about BIM for housing. And what we need to do is to make sure that the elements that are in BIM models and the individual components that are in BIM models carry with them the information that is required to enable that to perform. So we've got some basic things there. Obviously, the location is quite an important thing, but also the things like height, width, depth. I don't know if that's relevant to a sprinkler system. You know, maybe what the size of the fittings are and things like that. Those are the sorts of things that and also what material they're manufactured from. I presume that a sprinkler system is probably a composite of various different elements, and you know what that is made of. I suppose, could it also be how its fixings are? What type of components are used to keep it in place? Would it be on hangers? You know, so those are the sorts of things that I think that's good. That's really The other thing that we want to try and do here is avoid having to refer to different documents, because we want all of this to be digital. So if, for example, you've got a schematic drawing or a schematic plan with also some drawings, we actually want to be able to interpret that information so that we actually locate it within the building. So we want to be able to say that, okay, there are maybe, you've got a sprinkler system that's carrying over a complete floor. We want to know which rooms the particular sprinklers themselves are in, so that we can then say, okay, we've got 100 sprinkler heads to inspect, but there's 10 in that room and 10 in that room and 10 in that room, if that makes sense. So that's what we're trying to be able to determine. Okay.
Yeah, we're getting things put in the chat, which is wonderful. Okay. I think Jess is up to date with that now. Pauline saying the maintenance regime, yes.
What about whole life? What about its how long it should last?
Well, yeah. We have a lot of discussions about that. I mean, there are sprinkler systems that are over 100 years old. I mean, typically, 50 years is not unreasonable. Some components might need replacing in that time. Pumps will probably not last 50 years. The sprinklers, no moving parts.
Would there be any value in predefining that, Alan? Putting some sort of estimation on it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what would you do with that information? If we say the pump's 25 years, would that mean at 24 and a half years you'd replace it, or would you just have a look at it and say, actually, it's still fine? I don't know how you is this like the aircraft industry, or I wouldn't have thought so.
Joe, what would you say? Joe's from Sodexo.
It was the second option, so we'd look at it. We'd put it on the plan to replace because it's now 25 years old, but we'd also look at it and assess its condition.
Give it maybe a more thorough assessment than normal or something like that.
Yeah, be better to have life cycle data, because then that gets you to look at it a bit harder and puts it in the budget for the year ahead, that sort of thing.
I mean, one thing that the Germans do, we don't yet, is they do a 25-year inspection, a very detailed one. They take, I mean, we can do some of that here too. You take samples of sprinklers and have them tested to see if they still function properly. Obviously, those ones would have to be replaced. They do take an endoscope and look inside the pipe to see if it looks all right. Various things like that that can be done. A lot of these systems, residential ones, would use CPVC pipe, which doesn't really corrode, so you haven't got so much of a problem there. But yeah, you can get that's all in the
yeah, I think we'll come to that when we get on to. It's a very good point, but I think we'll probably come on to that when we get on to actually tasks.
Okay.
In terms of information needed, so installation date. So what was your terminology, George, for the end of life?
Expected life. Yeah.
Expected life. Let's put that down, Jess. Expected life. Paul, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, I mean, I do some stuff with Sibsy as well. And I'm sure, Alan, your name rings a bell, Alan. I know you from someone else. It's a small industry, isn't it, mate? So
it is, yeah.
Well, I'd say the question came up recently. We were talking in Sibsy about it because we've got some stuff in the guides about life cycle, but I don't think it's actually based on any sort of science. And I think, as you're saying there, Alan, about 25-year cycle. I mean, if you look at, and someone put in the chat about corrosion, I think the more you empty it, the more you fill it up, and the more you get the oxygen in there is when you're going to get the problems of it over a shorter lifespan. The less oxygen you're going to get back in there, the more it will be fine. Because it's a bit like it's like the galvanized pipe issue with seam welded galvanized pipe on dry systems. You need to put nitrogen in it, because if you don't, it don't last more than about 18 months. So
yeah.
So there's a few.
We've dropped galvanized pipe from the the next edition of the commercial standard, we're de-emphasizing it and saying just trying to encourage people to use nitrogen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because there's a few bits like that going on just on the CPC stuff as well. I mean, that's just all about the type of mastic. It's the only time you're going to get problems with that. So yeah, so I'm not telling you to suck eggs if you know about all that sort of stuff if it comes into it, but we've got bags of data on it if you needed it.
You're certainly.
I might be interested. Sorry, George.
Yeah.
Well, drop us a line if you're interested.
Yeah, I'm
in it.
updating Guide M, which has the life data in it. And currently, I'm just quickly looking.
Okay.
The sprinkler system main pump sets are 20 years. The pipe work and the heads is 30 years. And for valves, it's 25 for wet and 20 for dry.
Okay.
That doesn't sound wrong, and you may find, you know, that they're fine after that time, or actually they don't even last that long. You just
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay. Anybody got anything else to add on to there?
I'd just like to ask a question there of Paul. So you said galvanized pipe. Is that the pipe that's in the integral part of the sprinkler system?
Yeah, we had some. I mean, Alan's probably knows about this. So we had some problems on a job a while ago about literally seam welded galvanized pipe. And when you look at it, because when you drain it, because this is all to do with data centers, when you take, you know, obviously the water out of it and you fill it back up with air, you're filling up with oxygen. And if you've got a bit of degalvanization on the seam weld, all the oxygen goes for that point, and literally it eats its way through, and it is really, really quick. So that was the problem with that. And I think at one point, Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was sold as a miracle cure, wasn't it? Galvanized pipework for dry systems, and they suddenly realised there's a problem with this.
It's been used a long time.
Yeah.
And there's discussions about, is this just a problem that the steel that we're using in pipes is not as good as it was 20, 30 years ago? I mean, people don't really have good information about that. But yeah, galvanized. Is this for dry systems, by the way?
Yeah, it was dry systems.
You wouldn't have very many of those in these buildings. Normally, they'd all be wet systems. But yeah, in a dry system, you galvanize it, so it's internally galvanized. You've got this zinc coating on the steel, and it's a different type of corrosion to just black steel corrosion. But it doesn't matter what type it is. It makes a hole in the pipe. And so that's what can happen. You've got this awful environment. You've got moisture in there, because the way you test these things, you fill them up with water, pressurize them to check they don't leak, and then you try and drain it all out. Of course, you never quite do. And then you fill it up with compressed air. So you've got moisture, compressed air. So you've got 3 times the usual oxygen concentration. So guess what? Any risk of corrosion, off it goes. Which is why we're trying to encourage the industry to not to use galvanized pipe, but to fill these systems with nitrogen. But again, as I said, you're not going to have many dry pipe systems in a residential building.
But that's something that somebody like Pauline, for example, at L&Q, needs to be watching out for on these properties.
Yeah. You have a dry pipe system, the corrosion is faster. But yeah, it is faster, and you would not.
Well, that should be in the question 1B then, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think
Could Alan, could you make a note of that for me and put it as question 1B, so just puts it in the right place? Because that's very, very important.
Yeah.
I imagine that you might not find out until you actually need to use it.
I think it's like the CPCV mastic thing. I think that needs to probably go in there as well.
Yeah.
Because I think, you know, it's not, you got, in the right context, you have to think about it that regardless of what we know, no one else actually tends to know it.
Yeah.
You've got to literally just, you know, it's about the audience, isn't it? I think as well.
Paul, could you clarify what you mean by that?
Yeah, but basically, when CPCV started going into residential developments, essentially the mastics that, you know, this all comes back down to the fire stopping conversation the other day. Get the fire stopper in just to put all their general mastics in it. Well, unfortunately, the CPVC and the mastics they were using, and it was all to do with graphite based or non-graphite based. It was basically attacking the pipework, the plastic pipework, and most of it was blaze master anyway. And literally, it just caused the pipework to the plastic to sort of stress fracture pretty quickly. Yeah,
And
yeah,
that-
yeah.
that can impact on sprinklers, can it? Do you
Yeah.
have?
Yeah, I mean, you lose the pipe, you know. So
Yeah.
I mean, there are the companies like that make this plastic and for sprinkler systems publish lists of mastics that are compatible.
Oh yeah.
But unfortunately, that industry doesn't seem to know about this. So it doesn't mean that the guys read it, and it's yeah, you know, there's companies that do pipes. Fire stopping who are third party accredited and know what they're doing, but
Yeah.
I have the feeling that often they are not used for that kind of work.
Paul, could you put that into the chat for me and mark it with question 1B, please?
Yeah, of course I can.
That's
Thank
a really
you.
one, isn't it? Because like I say, I imagine that you might only find out that it doesn't work when you actually really need it to.
Well,
In the case,
probably,
it's
Yeah.
probably find out. Yeah, probably you'll find out beforehand when you get a leak.
yeah.
So it was a huge problem about 2-3 years ago, and they've been working on it hard. It seems to have gone quieter, so I think more people now know about them. I mean, obviously, you know, it seems I'm not the only one on this chat that knows about it, so that's a good start. And more people are taking care to use compatible mastic.
I think if you buy when you buy the pipe right now, and I think it's got, like as you say, like do not paint. It's got big warning labels
Yep.
on it now. Do not use this with any old mastics.
Yeah.
Would somebody that was maybe doing an assessment or an inspection on an existing building, would you be able to identify whether that particular mastic was the bad or the good one?
Well, I'm not going to speak for you, but I think if it was a bad one, you would have known about it probably already. To be honest with you.
I think that's right. Yeah. So yeah, you don't even need to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's more a case of replacement, isn't it? If someone comes in, does any work, and they go and gunk it back up again, you can't just. And this is the hard one, isn't it? Just in fire stopping generally, you might get FSIs on the ball with it, then someone comes in as individual, does a bit of work, and just goes and gunks it up with any old stuff. That's where the risk probably lies, you know.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Anybody else got anything to add on to that? I'll take that as a no.
Good.
We're going to close this one off and move down to question 3, Jess. What tasks are required to ensure sprinkler systems are installed, commissioned, inspected and maintained properly? George.
Well, the question here really is whether we can, again, we expect people to be trained, we expect people to be competent, but what we're also trying to do is to have a standard set of tasks that somebody like a building safety manager might be able to just be aware of, so they know that the work that's being carried out by somebody is, fits the bill, as it were. And the other point is that increasingly, the reason I've used SFG 20 there as an example is that, companies like, like Sodexo, they will employ competent and trained people to carry out the work, but certainly in hospitals and the like, they also issue them detailed work instructions as to what needs to be carried out. That's not because they are undermining the professionalism or the expertise of their people. It's that it's a belt and braces situation. So there's a proper record of what's been done. So what I'm hoping we can do here is, what are the basic steps, or could you point us somewhere where we can get the basic steps to say how a sprinkler system should be installed, commissioned, and maintained?
I mean, that is really the stuff that's covered in the standard, isn't it?
I don't know. That's the point, Alan. We don't necessarily have access to the standard, or indeed the ability to interpret it. Do you think it's possible to have somebody that would be able? I mean, have we got anybody on the call that is involved in installation?
Don't think so.
I mean, so I work for a big builder. We install bags of the stuff through various companies, but do you just see trying to think there's anyone that does it day in, day out. I mean, the hard thing is with this, and I mean, I mean this in the right context as well, is that I'm just trying to look at it from the point of view that when this all does get into BIM data eventually, Jules, that it's in such a way that it makes it easier for people to understand what it is. Because the hard bit is, it's like if you look at the deflectors and sprinkler heads, it's like having the right definition and stuff of what it actually is, if you know what I mean, getting that bit right.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we are working behind the scenes to do that, because one of the challenges is that people call things the same thing, something different. And what we're doing, we've got a data dictionary initiative with BRE called the Templater, which is designed to address that. So we've got different terminologies which can then be expressed in the way that reflects the audience, but it's all tied back to the same standards.
Yeah,
that's something that we are addressing. But the fundamental thing would be, if you're an experienced installer of those things, what would you do? Got that gas detector in there as well. Is that something I've put in?
I guess it's not relevant to sprinklers anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a mistake I've made. We're doing gas detectors this afternoon, so I've screwed up there.
Okay.
So you've got a sneak peek.
Right.
Yeah. So, what about commissioning? Is there a standard way that you're aware of that people would follow to do commissioning of a sprinkler system?
Well, yeah, it's maybe not spelt out in as much detail as perhaps you want. I mean, the assumption is with standards that people know the technology, and it's not every last thing that's written in.
Could that be written in by somebody that is a competent person that could contribute that, do you think?
Well, I can always I can ask some people in this country to do that. I mean, just to explain, I mean, my view is I cover the whole of Europe, so I don't know the tiniest detail of every country, but I do work with people in different countries. It just so happens I'm British, but could have been any nationality. So I do have contacts with people who do this work on a daily basis in the UK, and I can ask them.
I think that would be really helpful, because, yeah, I think I've already said it. Good.
Okay, so has anybody got anything they can add into this section?
Can we move off that very quickly, because it's just emphasising my incompetence by keeping showing.
Okay, let's move off the gas detectors that are there for this afternoon, and we'll move down into question 4, which is it's on competency.
I suspect this afternoon we're going to have the same conversation, because I'll probably sprinklers.
Right,
Yeah.
we're on competency, George.
I was just going to say, George.
You better not introduce this one, George.
So, George, can I say, I think BG70, I think it is from BIS, has just been revised as well, which covers a lot of the stuff on commission you're talking about. If you're not seeing it, I can probably talk to David Bleach and get you a copy of it anyway, because I think it goes. I need to check, but I think it goes through it all from memory. Unless I don't know if you know different to that, and I think it's BG70.
No, I don't know that one.
Okay, it's a BIS document.
This is the thing. There are so many of these things that even Alan doesn't know them, which is why we're trying to distill the salient points into this document to at least give somebody a start.
That'd be great.
Okay, sorry. So, question 4, competency. There's a lot already there, which I believe we've gone through enough of these meetings that it should pretty much cover it. It's more a question of whether there are any particular equivalent bodies that are specific to sprinklers, or any specific qualifications that would be specific to sprinklers.
Yeah, I believe BAFSA. Well, I know BAFSA. That's just the British Automatic Fire Sprinkler Association. Has some training courses for fitters.
Right. Okay.
So, and they've also done the blue card thing as well. So yes, there are specific. There's a blue card one for sprinkler fitters, and BAFSA has set up some courses. So I can't remember exactly what they are called.
That's okay. If you wouldn't mind just jotting that down. We've got BAFSA from Sarah. If you can add your other one, and we've got that there as a steer for us. Yeah,
and there's also then the companies themselves are third party accredited, which involves looking, as you know, how those systems work. I mean, lots of things to look at, and there are, I think there are maybe 3 organisations that do it, but really when it gets to residential systems, it's largely FIRAS that does that. But if they're commercial systems, so if you've got a mixed use building, which you say often have, then that part would be designed perhaps to a different standard, to the commercial standard, and those would then be working with the BRE scheme for sprinklers. So there's a couple of out there. Yeah, exactly. There's Warrington, and the other one is BRE with its LPS 1048 scheme.
That's it.
So I'll just send you that.
If you wouldn't mind, that'd be fantastic.
It's probably worth mentioning the 1048 scheme, because that if you look at what's in the actual sprinkler standard and where it goes to the next level of interpretation, which is where people get generator sizes wrong and stuff like that. So
that's the BRE scheme, is it, Paul?
No, is it BI scheme? Yeah, it's the red book, isn't it?
It is.
Red book. Yeah, the red book. Yeah. Too many of these things going on, Alan.
Okay, and it's good that they are.
It's just one.
Is there anything? Anybody else got anything more?
Sorry, Alan, what are you saying?
I was just saying, he's saying too many of these things going on. I mean, it's the same in every other country. There's heaps of them. There's 3 in the Netherlands, and so on and so on. So, yeah.
Can imagine.
Yeah, Exact does some training. Yes, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Does that cover it?
Alan, does your organisation represent or engage with the manufacturers?
Absolutely, we're partly funded by them. Absolutely. Okay. No, I know very well.
I've got a quick question that has come up from the other sessions, and that is the training of on particular products, manufactured products. In some cases, that has not been provided freely to people, so therefore that creates a barrier. And in some of the other groups, they've basically said that they think it should be reasonable that the manufacturers should provide the basic training alongside their products. And in the AOV industry, in the smoke industry, for example, that's exactly what they do. They provide that at no cost to the installers. Do you know if that's the case with sprinklers?
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, one thing I should say is that they don't sell to all and sundry. They only sell to third-party accredited installers.
Good.
So that's. I mean, you can probably get hold of a Chinese sprinkler somewhere on the internet, but the reputable companies only sell to third-party accredited installers, and they do training for them. The one that's really the most important is the CPVC training, to make sure people know how to handle it, how to join it together, and so that it doesn't leak. But I mean, I used to work for one of them, and I used to organise the training that we did. Not much of it was on residential systems because they're so simple. It was much more on the more complicated systems, to be honest. But yeah, they would, you know, and if an installer asked for training, I'm sure they do it.
Cool. Okay.
Okay, excellent. So unless anybody's got anything more they want to add into that one, I think we can shift down to question 5, which is all around change management, which we've touched on already, but there we go. Change management. George.
Yeah, so principally what we're doing here, we're saying that both during the design, specification, design and construction process, how can we ensure that we've actually got a proper change management process in place so that if things do get changed out, then we've got a proper rigor with which that's done. But my impression is with sprinkler systems, that happens less. My impression is, perhaps wrongly, that the sprinkler systems tend to be designed by the installation company. Is that wrong, Alan?
No, that's correct. They are designed by the installation company. Yeah, I mean that's the hydraulic calculations, and there's lots of. I mean, it's not complicated, but there are little things, you know, that you have to know where to place them, where you can't place them, what they can cover, and so on. So yeah, you have specialists to do it. Yeah, and then they do the hydraulic calculations to make sure that you've dimensioned the pipes correctly and so on.
So how does the procurement process work? I mean, if for example, you've got a typical sort of design build contract and you go through stage 3, stage 4 and stage 5, where stage 4 is detailed design. Well, I think it is. It's detailed design, isn't it? Where that's, and obviously it depends on the form of procurement. But my impression is that it's at that point that the specialist is brought in. But are they coming in on the basis of some sort of competition, or are they selected before they do the design work?
Well, to be honest, since I don't do it myself, I'm not entirely sure. But I know that some installers talk to project teams quite early in the process, you know, because you've got little things like if you need a tank for the water, well, you need to make sure you've left somewhere for it. And it's unfortunate if you forgot about that and then have to squeeze it in somewhere at the end. So, you know, just like anything else, it's nice to be in the loop early on. But yeah, you know, they have bid lists. Sometimes it's just that they want a third-party accredited installer. That might be enough. Other times they want to know about the company's funding, you know, can it take on the job? You know, honestly, having not done it myself, I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps who was the guy, the builder? Where are you again?
Sorry, yeah.
Probably know better than me.
Yeah. Well, what I'd say is this is how I try and break it out. If you're doing purely residential, we always treat it slightly different to commercial, because what tends to happen is that, and you know, you talk about technical design, George. I mean, you've got to break it down as BG6 does at BISRIA. So you used to have 3 stages. You'd have like stage like 4A, 4B, 4C, which is now changed to 1, 2, and 3. But essentially, is that even if the consultant's gone out to speak to someone, they'll have someone internally who will give it a go. But the hazard category of the building's all been predetermined in conversations. It should be with, you know, the approving authority, the fire brigade. Sometimes that doesn't happen anyway. But when it comes down to the procurement of it, is when the guys come on board as a builder, so we'll take a contract on as design and build. So we're looking at the risk of the project. We'll bring a sprinkler contractor on in the procurement process, sometimes via an MEP main contractor underneath of us, and sometimes direct, depending on the type of job or the complications. Because the problem is that if you look at things like you know, the sizing of the tanks, hydraulic calculations, what goes into, you know, whether it's Cat A with an office ceiling or non-office ceiling, because as Alan, you probably know, obviously, if you've got no ceiling, you then got, you know, your head's above, you know where the ceiling void would have been. The obstacle rules all been clarified now, so you need these guys on pretty early. It doesn't always happen, but again, it's about the interfaces, George. If you've got zonal control valves, you know, for, you know, different areas of an office floor. You've got test pumps, the power supplies never get picked up, the fire alarm supplies never get picked up, all the little power nuances. So when you look at it in technical design, what happens is that we look at the sprinkler contractor, we're going through it with them all, but then we have to go back and revise the power plans because things will change. The pump might be slightly bigger, it might have been a 45 kilowatt, now it's a 70 kilowatt. Does that make sense? So that's the kind of habitual things that go kind of wrong in it. So if you look at it from, I suppose, the inquiry point of view, we have to be careful is that if you get a contractor that's undervalued, what that package is potentially going to be because the original designer is not the ultimate designer of it, the pressures to not do it possibly as right as you should do. Do you know what I mean? So that's just trying to describe it in a nutshell. You know, that kind of works. But residential, generally you'll bring them on straight away because the residential sprinkler layout just affects the whole apartment. Whatever that is what you're stuck with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, when you say straight away, if I'm just looking at that simplicity work stages, what you mean by that? Would you mean at stage 3?
If any good developer in residential will bring a sprinkler contractor on for the apartments at stage 3, they should do it before the design's finished because it affects your whole apartment layout. Because you know, obviously architects want things line and linear, and sprinklers don't do that in residential. They go where they've got to go, if that makes sense.
That's a really important point, actually. Yes.
Because you can't have them too close together because one affects the other, and you can't have them too. You know, I'm not a sprinkler designer by any extent. I can only say to you that we learned a lesson in development. I'm not saying what company, but you need to get them in at stage 3 because they just affect the whole layout of the apartment. You know,
for the housing associations that are on the call, how are you aware of whether that tends to happen? Because from my experience, the way most buildings are procured, it's through a DMB process, and I've not heard of sprinkler people being appointed before the contractor's appointed. Does anybody have any knowledge of that?
No, I don't have any knowledge of that coming from a housing association. I'm not on the development side of the business, but I haven't heard of sprinkler consultants or anything being appointed head of contractors. And a lot of the sprinkler work that we are doing at the moment is the retrofitting to existing rather than, well, the new builds will be being done, but a lot of the work that I'm more aware of is on the retrofitting side.
Yeah, I think what I'm making is, I think, Pauline, is that if you got an architect that wants everything line and linear, then unfortunately, you know, I mean, hopefully you agree with this, Alan, but you end up with a situation, the sprinkler heads end up where they've got to go because of the rules around the spacing in residential. You can't just like put them close together and make them look all neat and tidy, that they're set distances because one spray affects the one next to it. So.
Well, I mean, they're minimum distance apart, but it's, you know, I'm surprised to hear you say that it's actually really affected the internal layout. So we'd always assumed that with the sprinklers we were trying to come up with products that would fit around any layout. But
can we just
That's what we were finding, Alice. So that's what I was asking. I was not saying I'm right, wrong, or indifferent. That's what we ended up doing, was bringing him in early.
Yeah, Paul, can we just tie back to the question a bit on the actual change side of things, in terms of the actual change management?
Well, go on, sorry.
I think we are doing, Richard. I think this is really important, and actually the other section that we've got, which is dry risers and things, it is probably going to be less intense. So if you don't mind, Richard, I'd like to.
Okay.
Because the other point with this, Paul, is because I mean, just to give you an example, Alan, what one of the architects we work with was explaining that the transition, because as you know, until quite recently, a lot of residential developments were not designed with sprinklers in mind. And what they were saying was that a scheme that they were involved with recently for Westminster Council they designed it around a non-sprinkler type of solution, as it were, where, you know, compartmentation was different, And then when they then brought in the sprinklers, it meant that they needed to fundamentally redesign the layouts. Now, the good news with that was that they ended up with an extra flat per floor because of the way the spacing meant. But what they were saying was that Osborne, who the contractor, had been quite innovative in their view in bringing in the sprinkler supplier at stage 4. So this was whilst they're in pre-construction service agreement, is it, where they're negotiating the price, because what the builders tend to have to do is they get appointed at the end of stage 3, beginning of stage 4, and they then have a period when they're working up their final design and their final price before they actually get appointed. And they don't get appointed until the end of stage 5. So therefore, a lot of the subcontractors, like the sprinkler people, don't actually get appointed until stage 5. And that then is problematic, because it means that the designers or the architects who have been working up their detailed design then have to revisit it because of the sprinklers. So I think it's very apposite what Paul's saying there in terms of the workflow, and I think it's yeah.
One thing I can tell you is that if you have sprinklers, say in a flat, you can have an open plan flat, and without them you can't. And you know, I guess as more and more people now know that most flats are going to need sprinklers, you can take that from the beginning. But I can imagine a lot of projects this was not realised, and so that could be what you're describing, is that they'd laid out the flat in a certain way. With you come in your front door, you've got your corridor, and every other door leads off that into other rooms.
Yes.
Rather than you come in the front door and you can see the living room, and then beyond it is a bedroom, which is what people want. Now that's allowed with sprinklers and enhanced detection. And if you now know you're going to be putting the sprinklers in anyway, you can design like that, whereas previously you didn't.
There's a couple of things we experienced was that
Sorry, can I just interrupt again here? Sorry, please let me interrupt. Right, I appreciate that this is very important and very valuable information.
Slowing you down, sorry.
No, seriously, I really do, and I take George's point. But if it doesn't fit in with a question, it's going to get lost. So Can I suggest we put in a supplemental question that includes all this information, because otherwise it's not going anywhere.
Well, I think if we capture it, yeah, I agree, Richard. I think if we capture it, we can put it in the notes even. Yeah,
absolutely, but I'm saying it needs to be written somewhere, doesn't it? We need to get something down, because I think you're right. It is very, very important, but it's we need to get the points down.
Okay. Well, I think for now we've got it recorded. I don't mind picking up on this bit, Richard.
Okay, fine. If you're happy to do that, that's fine then.
Yeah, I'll do it afterwards. Right. Okay. The other question I've got on this actually is, I think I saw something at the end of last week that suggested that sprinklers are going to be either mandatory or certainly heavily recommended on existing buildings, on existing blocks in housing associations. Is anybody from the housing association aware of that?
So under ADB current version, any new builds over 11 meters are required to have sprinklers. There's no reactive position at the moment around retrofit, though most providers are adopting a position of applying a similar standard across the stock, but that's not being driven by legislation so much. It's been driven by our duty of care to our residents, not to have a two-tier system in place for housing stock, whereas if you're lucky enough to live in a newly constructed building, you've got sprinkler protection, but those of you who live in a building above 11 meters that hasn't been built in the last kind of 3 to 4 years, you don't get the same level of protection. But I'm not aware that the government is moving at any point to mandate that for existing stock.
I agree. That's exactly. I don't hear that either, but we do know there's a lot of retrofit going on.
All right, Paul.
Yeah, there is a lot of retrofit going on. Just a point that might be useful to people is that we've looked at the guidance around this, and we're currently rewriting our employer requirements on the development side because there's statutory, as has been mentioned, 11 metres plus. But when you get into funding and guidance around that, for instance, GLA, so London, anything you're doing in London on the social housing side, all buildings, regardless of height, all new buildings have to have sprinklers in that sense. So the reason we're reviewing our requirements is there's statutory guidance, and then if you've got developments going on which are GLA funded or other forms of funding, you've got to look at the conditions around that because there is different requirements. It would be an awful disastrous mistake to get to the point of handover or something and then realise that you're going to have a great chunk of your funding removed because you haven't complied with the guidance, even though you're statutory and legislation-wise correct.
That it's interesting, Paul, that you say 11 metres. So this is a lower bar than the safety bill.
It's a lower bar, but I think the general consensus is there's a lot of work and reviews around the 11-metre rules and what buildings are encapsulated by that. I think generally, from my view in the industry and people I've spoken to, in about 3-4 years' time, I think building safety will fall to 11 metres, the encapsulation, the in-scope sort of spec. But if it was to fall to 11 metres at the moment, the workload would be far too horrific, as well as the cost. So I think 18 metres has gone in as a reasonable rule, and there's reasons why we go to 18 metres. We all know the history of that. But I think at some time there's got to be a levelling up. And it seems too much discrepancy between what goes into 11 metres plus and 18 metres plus. So whether it goes one way or the other, I think there will be a levelling out of this in a few years' time.
So would I be right to say, just interpret for what you're saying, is that there is sprinklers of 11 metres?
Sorry, I missed that. There was some interference.
Sorry, so I coughed. It's my fault. Sorry.
Am I right, Paul, in interpreting that the cladding, for example, that's the 18-metre rule, but on sprinklers there's a requirement at 11 metres?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's correct. So 18, it's now building safety is and cladding, etc., is now defined as 7 stories or 18 metres, whichever is reached first. There has been some interesting rules around measuring buildings, and certainly sprinklers at the moment is 11 metres. Yes,
and that's statutory.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's approved document B, which is the regulatory guidance. That's England, by the way. Scotland, it's all blocks of flats, and Wales, it's all housing.
And right. Can I just add to what I think, Alan, you onto that as quick as I was then, is that the functional requirement of building regulations, the outside should not cause fire to spread across it. And I think, as you say, the approved documents for the ACOP gives you guidance on where that starts. Not to say that a building below it shouldn't be looked at in different contexts depending on what it's situated next to, the risk inside of it. This is where it becomes a bit difficult, so I'm sure the same sort of principle is on the sprinkler side as well.
I've got one final question to ask Richard, just on this, if I may, and that is about this whole thing about retrospective fitting. My understanding is that is by no means straightforward, but is that right, Alan?
I didn't follow you. What are you asking? That
sorry, the retrospective, the fitting of sprinkler systems into buildings that weren't originally designed with sprinkler systems.
That's voluntary unless you've changed the use of it. So if it's for example, if it's an office block and you change it to flats, then it would be regarded as a new building, and there's a bit of that going on. But yeah, otherwise they are not retrospective. But as a few people have confirmed, there is a lot of retrofitting going on because of the duty of care approach that was mentioned a moment ago. In fact, after Grenfell, lots of local authorities began announcing this, and I started noting them down. And once I got to 1,000 buildings, I stopped counting, and that was by December 2017. 1,000 buildings had been announced that they would be retrofitted, and it's just been more since then.
And how challenging is that as an exercise for a sprinkler company?
Well, I know one installer that has one part of the company that just does retrofits, and the guy that is in charge of it says he loves it. He doesn't have to interact with any other trades because it's just him. You know, so and quite a lot of these old blocks of flats have got a big water tank on the roof, so they've got a tank already of water. So it's it's a bit more complicated. You've got you as he put it to me, the guys that do the new work aren't always presentable enough to present to, for people who live on the building already to see them. It's different kind of people. But it's actually quite easy to do. Most flats can be done in a day, so you don't have to sort of be rehoused or anything like that.
And from the housing association representatives on here, what's your experience been of managing that process, that change? What are the issues?
I think the physical part of the work, as the gentleman just said, is fairly simple. The complexity from our perspective is in relation to the ownership model of the property, and the landlord and tenant piece in relation to, do we actually have statutory authority to enter in a leaseholder property to retrofit a system in a property that we don't actually own? And then obviously working with residents who believe that sprinklers activate as described in Die Hard the movie, to get them to put them inside their homes is the other battle. So it's more around access to enable works than complexity over actually doing the work itself.
And how is that going, Sarah?
I'd say it's fairly mixed. We tend to be able to win over or coerce tenants, leaseholders, and obviously the percentage of properties in any individual building that are leasehold are owned will change, and their position is also informed by whether or not they've actually been exposed to a fire incident. Because as soon as there's a fire in a block of flats, it will be, why haven't you fitted sprinklers, versus someone who's never actually been through that experience, who just sees it as a financial burden. So it is very much how enabled it is by the lived experience of the individual versus their financial position in context of other things around cladding that are happening in the sector as well, and also the provider's position on the costs. Some people are seeking to reclaim 100% of the sprinkler installation. Some have adopted the position to support the safety of the building, that they will not recharge leaseholders. So obviously there is a carrot in relation to the fact that we're not going to pass this cost on to you, and you're getting the benefit of the system, versus you'll get the benefit of the system, but you have to contribute several £1,000s to its installation. So it is very dependent on several factors in relation to how well providers are doing or not doing in relation to retrofit.
And are you finding that, maybe you've got a block that's got 40 or 50 flats in it, that 3 of the flats might be blockers to you doing the whole building? So under those circumstances, would you just go ahead and do the ones that you've got approval from?
Yeah, I mean, previous organisations I've worked in, we've done kind of almost ballot situations where we set a minimum standard that we won't progress with the project unless we've got X percentage of individuals that have agreed for access. And if it's a small percentage of people who are preventing access, we will simply pipe up to the door and continue dialogue. And obviously ownership changes as well. So you might have a turnover of an individual and the incoming person might be more open to allowing the system to be extended into their property. There are some where I've worked previously where it was such a high percentage of leasehold owners that were against that it just wasn't viable to retrofit for 23%, for example, of the units.
Cool. That's very helpful for me.
Okay, well, I think we've talked that one out. So let's close sprinklers and move on to
Just whilst you're
dry
doing,
wet risers.
yeah, Richard, just whilst you're doing that, can I just ask a question of Alan on a I saw Plumis, which is a mist solution for suppressing fire. And I think I mentioned that to you, and you alerted me to some issues with that type of mist type of thing, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
Well, I mean, I know the Plumis guys quite well. I've seen fire tests and had chats with them. Water mist. Some people think water mist is a well-established technology since it's been on the market for 30 years, but in some ways it's still very immature, with standards still being developed, for even just the basic components. And unfortunately, a lot of the installers are not third-party accredited, nor are their components third-party tested. So Plumis is actually one of the ones trying to do this properly. Although their particular design, their philosophy doesn't fit in with the way the standard is written that we have for water mist in this country. Basically, they have a nozzle on the wall, and the standard assumes the nozzle is on the ceiling, out of the way. But yeah, it's something to be careful of with water mist, and it's indicative of the government's guidance in approved document B that it doesn't offer water mist as an alternative for flats higher than 11 meters. It does say sprinklers, and that is not an accident. The same approach has been taken with BS 9991. So water mist isn't a bad thing, but there's been some unscrupulous people in that business, and it's rather trashed the reputation of it, I'm afraid.
Paul.
Yeah, I just agree with those comments very strongly. We've discovered, and we've been approached by a lot of contractors that are promoting these systems. My concern is a lot of them that we've seen the approaches from have closed protocol systems, and the maintenance is cost prohibitive, shall we say. And there's no justification for putting them in. I've seen a lot of project managers on the development side come to me and say, look, I'm being pushed for this as an alternative to a sprinkler. I think I agree with the previous comments. I think it's far too early to start adopting these, and you would need to go through each case on an individual basis with a very fine tooth comb to reassure yourself that you're meeting the correct standards and you're not locking yourself into something. I will take the exception of Plumis and say I think their approach is sort of very professional. However, my overarching comments on water misting systems have been to date, watch is all we can do at this time. It's too early to start looking at adopting these, and I think it throws a spanner in the works for a lot of local authorities and housing associations. I think it's too early.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
I'll shut up now, Richard.
You carry on. Okay, so we're on to dry or wet riser systems. What are the component elements of dry or wet riser systems? We've got a little list there: pipework materials, pipework supports, valve types, primary electric pumps, secondary diesel electric pumps, drain down pipework valves, and inlet boxes and outlet boxes. Anyone want to add anything onto that list? Component elements.
Are there any keys or things like that to be able to get at them?
Yeah, there would need to be keys to get access to the boxes, yeah.
Can you drop that down, please, Jess? Keys. I know that might sound daft, but
Well, no, it's a component part, isn't it? Access is kind of essential. Anybody else got something in there?
is the inlet box and the outlet box what I would see in a corridor, for example, where you see the dry riser coming up and maybe there's a door in front of it or something like that? Is that what that means?
Yeah, I mean, I put them in there for one reason, that there's the boxes that you get where you normally have a key and you open it up and you go inside and the fireman connects their hose, takes it through the stairs to level above and fights the fire. The reason why this is so important, because you used to be able to buy fire rated boxes, you can't buy them anymore. And what's been happening is that the fire strategy has been compartmenting the building this way, and the minute you open the door, you're into the level above. So it depends on where they are. So they're quite a key component. You need to compartment this way with them, and it's been done that way. That's been a problem on a lot of jobs recently.
Crikey! So by opening the door to the fire to the dry riser, you're creating an opportunity for something to go up to the next floor. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and it depends because there's different arrangements for this. So you've got, you know, you've got pressure differential systems. Whatever you're doing, you've got different arrangements you can have. Sometimes you've got residential, they're in the staircase. Sometimes they're not, they're inside the corridor, rightly or wrongly. Sometimes they're inside the firefighting shaft. And it all depends on where it is, because the minute you go to plug in the device, and sprinklers are no different, if you go to the valve to turn them off, you can't have a situation where you're open to the levels above, because you're breaching. The minute you open the door, you're breaching the compartment. It's quite a common one at the moment, you know, because you can't buy the fire rated outlet boxes, and they've got behind doors and stuff. But you still got to remember, the minute you open the door, if it's an open riser, then it's not right. That's why I kind of mentioned it.
Yeah, no, that's really important. That will that's going to come into on question 1B, isn't it? Very definitely. Yeah, excellent. And anything else in terms of component elements?
How are you?
No.
Okay, I'm going to say that we've covered that. And move down to dependencies on other systems. We look at those.
It's all very, for me, it was all very similar to the other stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
ATS is automatic transfer switch, by the way, just so you know what that stands for. Sorry, it's a small acronym. It's a changeover between one supply and the other.
Anything else anybody wants to add into that? No. Okay. Let's get on to question 1A. What risks do they or it mitigate?
I think there was a comment earlier, wasn't there, about the fire load, and someone described it a different way, which is the same thing, isn't it? I think that was might have been the guy from Haringey.
Yes, that's right. What was it?
I'm just trying to find it
that
now.
was the point about it's reduced fire spread.
That's right. That's right.
Etc. As well. I think with wet risers, a significant part of that is they're designed to maintain the compartmentation of a building. So what does it mitigate? It mitigates the failure of compartmentation.
Yeah.
And
Paul, could you type that into your chat for me?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Thank you. Yeah.
It reduces spread of fire.
So it mitigates the compromising of compartmentation, fire spread as well. Yeah. Anything else?
Again, that's fine.
Okay, let's go down to this. We'll bring in what you were saying, Paul. To what risks the dry and wet riser system success? I still can't say that word.
Certain ones I can't say either. Don't worry. That's susceptible is not one of them, but I've got other ones I can't say. When I say it, you'll laugh because you'll go, it's that word, isn't it? I'll go, yeah.
I will want them for the next meeting. Write them.
I will do. I say,
yes, you know what you said earlier, just literally 5 minutes ago, Paul, was absolutely very pertinent to this, wasn't it?
Yeah.
About opening the door and it totally compromises.
Yeah, did you know it's a bit like you can't get out of an aircraft when it's flying, isn't it? But you open and it's like Wile E. Coyote stuff. What I was going to say as well, don't forget what Alan said earlier as well was obviously not being switched on.
Yeah, But
Alan was absolutely spot on with that. They only work if they're switched on.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can say 1,000 other ways, but he's right. Unless they're switched on, they don't work.
Put that in, Jess.
Yeah, put not switched on.
And I mean, look, there's two things while we're in this forum. Just I thought about earlier, and I see he's had to go off for a second. I was on the phone just now. Is that one of the things to bear in mind? I don't know how you want to pick this up. Is that CLT generally as a structure only burns down really when you're building it. They don't tend to burn down when they're finished. Just to bear that in mind, because obviously there's lots of CLT jobs going on. And that's the one, probably one for the sprinkler one, is that having things working early on are important, and it comes into this as well, because when you build a building under HSG 168, the wet riser should be, or the dry riser should be operational as soon as the structure goes up in the air. Do you know what I mean? Even before construction, you know.
Yeah.
So I just putting it out there, just because
Yeah. I think that's,
bear that in mind.
yeah.
I don't know how that gets picked up.
I'll tell you what, I type it in, Paul. Type it in, because we will pick it up, because we have an appendix at the back that covers adjacent issues. So please put it in there so we don't lose it.
CLT is compressed laminated timber, is it?
Yeah, cross-laminated timber. Yeah, it's very good, because it's all about the pyrolysis of the glue layers. So obviously, once the wood chars, it sort of automatically extinguishes. But if you get to the next glue layer and it falls off, you've got fresh wood. Away it goes again. That's the problem with it. So it's always about the integrity of the glue layer when you do CLT.
So that's a risk to the dry riser or the wet riser performing.
I don't know how to pick it up, but I think the point is that when you start building a building, you don't just get to the end. I know, contrary to modern builders, like you don't just flick the switch on. There's things that have to be live at different periods of the build. So just because you're building it and there's no one living there doesn't mean you haven't got workers in the fire brigade that have still got to be protected. So things like, you know, wet risers should be operational at certain heights. If you've got CLT, you might need to look at temporary fire protection, because of the CLT relies on the sprinklers generally to stop it, you know, going up. These kind of things. I don't know if it's a case of,
you know, where this, I think you're saying where this would be picked up. I think this would be picked up in question, I think it's question 3, which is about tasks, which lead into methodologies, because I think it would come into that, wouldn't it, George?
You're right, Richard. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, don't forget that, Paul, because we want it. But
yeah, I'm going to type it into the chat. Sorry, it's just, you know.
Yeah, if you bash it in there, we'll sort it out. I don't want to lose any of this stuff. I'm just trying to make sure that we get it into somewhere that we don't lose it.
Okay, let's press on, Richard.
Okay, that's great then. So I'll assume that's question 1B sorted. Move down to question 2, Jester, which is about what information do we require to ensure that a dry or wet riser system performs as required. We've got the basic information in there, as we know. What else do we need to know? Pauline.
So a lot of the information that we similarly needed for sprinklers, so we would need to know the installation date, warranty. We've got location.
Sort of generic information, you're saying, yeah, basically. Is there anything specific to wet and dry risers?
Yeah, so I was going to say, so I missed this bit earlier as well. Look, obviously they've got to be able to run for the duration of the fire. Yeah, so time's an important one.
Oh, okay. So how would you say that? Time for what? Time to expiry, or
it's the same for sprinkler. The sprinklers should be sized for a certain amount of heads and a certain tank volumes that they can run for a certain period of time. Alan will know this to the because he's looking at him on
right. So this okay. This needs to be transposed over into the sprinkler section as well, then, doesn't it?
Yeah, because I think this is all now about. If you look at the metadata that's going to go in on these things, this is all about. So you've got the period of time it's got to run for. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and if you take things like the pump sets, you know, obviously you've got,
like you say, literally the size of the tank. You know,
the size of the tank
does it actually hold?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, how long is it going to last? Because it'll be defined in the fire strategy. Wet risers will be the same as well. There'll be a set tank volume and time it's got to last. So the time factor for the fire is really important. So the duration of the fire period is really important.
Yeah.
What's the other one on there as well? And again, things like, I know this is going to sound rudimentary, but things like time delays for pump starts are important as well. time delays, things like these. This is all the stuff which is the performance that you need. Time delay for pump operation, size of the tank.
Yeah.
You know.
Right. So this would be duration of operation, kind of. How would we call that?
Yeah. It's
Operational duration.
In fire conditions. Yeah.
Operational duration. We'll remember what that is, just, and we can spin it out further when we're writing it up.
I mean, if you haven't got copies of the stat, I'll try and get what I can, because I think we need to get the definitions right. That's the.
I think that's really important.
Thing.
We've got. I think we may have mentioned to you, depending on who was on the meeting at the time. We are, as part of what we're doing with our new black box site, there is a section on resources. So all of these documents you're sending through, we'll be putting on that section.
Yeah, or if they are not publicly available, Paul, you can just share them with us so that we can,
of course,
yeah,
interpret from them. I
can get lots of stuff. That's all. I'm just a bit conscious. If this is going to the right people at the end of it, everyone needs to, because the big thing is, like, a good example, and this is off topic, but a door handle into a cubicle. You know, if it's in the sanitary wear schedule and it's listed in the contract, it's sanitary wear. It's not ironmongery, it's sanitary wear, because the definition's quite important, because obviously when it goes into the BIM world, it's got to be defined in such a way there's traceability. That's all.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's something probably we'll pick up with you separately, Paul, because what you've just said there is critical. Because for different purposes, you need to be able to interpret that information differently. Good. What about flow rates? Is a riser system, is it designed to provide so many volumes of?
Yeah. I think flow rate's important. It is one of the parameters. But don't get me wrong. When you start breaking all of this out and you look at a pump, the pump's going to have certain criteria that the pipework won't. Do you know what I mean? But you just got to list it all out. So flow rate's going to be one. Pressure's going to be another.
Yeah. Joe from Sodexo, would you have a view on this? I'd like to keep you on your toes. Joe, are you still with us? Maybe not.
Oh, sorry, I was cold and went and got a jumper. Did I hear my name?
Sorry. Yeah, I was just wondering, Joe, in terms of dry and wet risers, whether your experience would say what other parameters might we need to know about dry or wet risers?
The only thing I could think of is the zone it protects, maybe connection points and drain down points.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So zone it protects and drainage. Did you say?
Yeah. Drainage or fill points, whatever version.
Yeah. The drainage is always an interesting one. It's about 8 litres a second or something silly if the size them for.
It's got to go somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Or if you don't size it right, it don't go anywhere. It just floods the room. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody else got anything to add into this?
You say zones protected?
Yeah.
Joe?
You did, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. I just seen that note, Paul. Good one.
Okay, let's crack on.
Okay, question 3. What tasks are required to ensure, this is another one of yours, Paul, we need. What tasks are required to ensure dry or wet riser systems are installed, commissioned, inspected and maintained properly? we've got that SFG 20 example, which I think we've already been through. So if we, so what tasks?
So is there anybody that you're aware of, Paul, that would be able to give us a bit of a steer on the installation of wet risers? Would that be as part of the normal mechanical package?
Yeah, the thing is, we have to be careful, and I think, you know, it was alluded to earlier, is that we have to think of this in the context of not just the big builders like us, you know, so you know who I work for, and also you have to look at it in the context of the smaller builders as well that are doing the smaller work. Because, I mean, if I asked, you know, generally how many people actually have companies that are using BIM for them in the forum, I don't suppose it's every single person's got contractors using BIM anyway. You know, so the hard bit here is it's like you know, taking into account both sides of it. So you see where I'm going with this? It's like making.
Forget BIM for the minute, because we can deal with the BIM bit separately.
That's fine. That's what I was asking.
Yeah, the important thing here is really to understand what. So if, for example, it's as part of the mechanical services package, then is that normal, or would it be a specialist that would put in something like dry risers?
No, it's a specialist that will do it. Yeah, cradle to grave, including the sprinklers as well.
Ah, right. So the dry riser and the dry risers and the sprinklers may well or would normally be let as a single package.
Yeah, so that's how we would generally do it. This is why I'm just being a bit, you know, hesitant, because how we procure it isn't necessarily the same as other people may procure it. You might have housing associations here, and I don't know how it works for them, where they're actually buying individual packages. They're buying a sprinkler company, whereas we would actually buy maybe a big company, you know, T Clark's or someone like that, and they'll buy it all separately underneath. All depends on the scaling of the job. But essentially, normally the wet riser, the dry riser, whoever's going to be in there, and the sprinklers all end up under the same package.
Right. Okay. Joe, could you help me with this? Could you? What would you, in your experience, how do you think that would be?
Yeah, I'd go with that. It's a one system, a whole system that you pay somebody to install. You wouldn't divvy it out particularly.
I don't know. There's people out there that get people to install the pipe work, then just flick the switch and hope for the best. I don't know, you know, because it all depends on the scaling of the business. We're very big, obviously. The housing associations are set size, and how that gets procured. You know, that's why it's good to get other people's views on it.
Yeah. I'd always go to one supplier.
Makes sense, doesn't it, Joanne? But you know, we know in this world that doesn't always prevail.
No.
Okay.
Right. So that's right.
I think probably let's move on, Richard.
Yeah. Okay. Right. We'll move down to question 4 on competency.
I'll see if I can send you through a thing on pre-construction for residential sprinklers. I think I've still got it, George. Makes it a bit easier, than you can maybe look at that, take some stuff out of it.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So are there any special competencies or organisations that would be looking at dry risers, or is this, I guess this is wrapped up with the sprinklers that we were talking about earlier? What if there are no sprinklers going into the building? I mean, I appreciate now it's a standard, but if you presumably a building that doesn't have sprinklers, you'd still have dry risers going in.
Yeah.
Again, that's driven by height under ADB.
And it's height and depth, isn't it? I think height and depth.
So under those circumstances, would a company that, well, it doesn't matter. Yeah, that's okay.
I think whether you go to buy a wet rise or sprinklers from, unless you're really going to go out your way to get yourself into trouble, generally that they'll fall under the same sort of qualifications and specialism. That's where it all kind of comes from.
Cool.
So basically, this is almost a duplicate of what we've already done.
I think so. Yeah, I think it is. I think it might be worth getting if you get hold of Alan, getting his opinion on it because he might know a bit more. But that's how that's how I'm seeing it at the moment.
Okay. Anybody else got thoughts on that? Okay. Well, pending speaking with Alan, let's assume that's the case, shall we?
Yeah.
Let's go down to the change management, which again I can imagine we're going to be duplicating across. So instead of saying anything on this list we need to add to, is there anything on this list or what we've already said on sprinklers that we need to add into here? Anything specific to dry risers that hasn't been covered under sprinklers? Sounds like a no.
It sounds though we might and finishing early, Richard.
It sounds this works for me. Okay, well that's it. Well, yeah, I say pending speaking with Alan on question 4 regarding training, specific training on dry risers, and speak of the devil, here he is. Just when we thought we were going to get out, Alan, you just spoiled everybody's afternoon.
You have a question for me? I had
just a quick one actually, Alan. On the question 4, the training question.
Yeah.
Obviously, we went into that on sprinklers, and we understand that most people would be procuring sprinklers and dry risers together. That said, is there anything specific, any specific training that would not be covered in what we've already said about sprinklers?
But do
you agree with that anyway?
I don't. I know. I mean, I can remember an installer complaining to me that exactly that is not what happened. That the risers were separately purchased, and complaining that they were not hydraulically correctly designed and so on. I mean, the standard BS 9990 for all of these things is not written by people who know about hydraulics. It's largely written by FAR officers. So there's a view that perhaps it needs an update.
That's an interesting point. That is a risk, isn't it? What you're saying there, Alan, is that could you just repeat what you've said, or?
Well, I mean, they're fairly simple. It's just a pipe, just going straight up through a building, so it's not that high, not that complicated. But yes, that they're saying that in these residential buildings, that the guy doing the sprinkler is not the guy doing the riser, not necessarily.
Yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah. Because you're off the domestic tank, aren't you, essentially, Alan? That's the.
So I don't know if that matches what you find, Paul, or maybe not gone into that level of detail, but
I think from the scale of projects that Mace got involved in are maybe different than the scale of, because I mean, what I've found going through this with the housing associations is that the construction company will then let the M&E installation to a company, and then they let it to other people. So you end up with another level of trade or firm that's actually buying and installing materials that's probably 2 or 3 steps down from the contractor.
Yeah, well, this is the point we was making earlier, George. Is that, I mean, generally we'll only use certain companies to do the sprinkler design anyway, and one of the guys we use actually does the standards for it. So I know we're always in a pretty good place with whoever we use. But you're right, it's when, I mean, we've had projects where, which you've corrected, but I've gone down simple things where you find buzz bar without compartmentation seals on it, because the guy that's buying the buzz bar is 4 tiers down the chain. They've never seen a fire strategy drawing. They don't even know what they're looking at. They're just buying kit. And that's probably the risk here, as you're saying, is if you're buying sprinklers from a reputable company that does all the hydraulic calculations, and they're with one size fits all, then generally you'll be all right. But I think it's when you're not doing that, and you've got a sprinkler contractor and someone's designing the hydraulics of a boosted cold water systems, where you're going to fall foul.
Yes.
Does that sound about right, Alan?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just checking. That's all.
So that would be a risk then, wouldn't it?
A risk.
Yeah. So that wants to go into that wants to go into 1B.
Okay. Paul, with that, would you be able to provide, you said that you deal with a sprinkler supplier who is trusted. Could you let me know who that is?
No, I will do. I'll get him in. I'll get some people in touch with you, George, if they can spare you some time.
Cool.
I will do. And I'm just looking at. I used to do PCSAs and all this to write them all. So I see if I can drag out part of a PCSA and send it over as well. Because you forget, unfortunately, if you do multiple subjects, you forget stuff. It's like crazy.
So PCSA being a pre-construction service agreement.
Yeah, if you got, it was alluded to earlier. If you got a PCSA agreement, and this is all about procurement. If you're friends with the client, bring in for PCSA, you can bring people in, like sprinkler companies and stuff, to aid the designer, to supplement the MEP designer. Because as we said earlier, they don't do fire dampers, they don't do sprinklers, they don't do all of that specialism. They don't do it that the specialists do. But you can then feed it back in. If you've got a contract that's come in for tender where it's, two-stage action, submit your best price, then agree the cost plan. Then sometimes if the design's already gone past stage 4, and the consultant's being novated to do nothing, then you're not necessarily going to see all of these problems that sit there. Hence the reason why when everyone talks about, obviously the tragedy at Grenfell about procurement, the way that procurement happens encourages best price, fixed cost certainty over actually, do you know what you're building? That makes sense.
Would a building services consultant, let's say like Arup, would they ever design a sprinkler system?
That's a loaded question, that one. I think, forgetting, company names apart here, I think it doesn't matter who the services consultant is. This is just from my experience. I'd like to see what Alan's view on this as well, is that if you're not the company that actually installs it and you're doing it from a building services point of view, you might be a sprinkler engineer, but it doesn't mean you've got the amount of time to design it properly, because ultimately you're not warranting it. You're not saying if you follow my design, it's going to be correct. That's going to come from a specialist. So contractually, you've got to make sure that you vet what you've got. And if you haven't got a specialist there and there's very limited time to tender, and you've got to put it in context, some tenders, these can be £100 million jobs. So your tender will is 8 to 12 weeks. What can you find out in 8 to 12 weeks about a job that big?
Yeah.
Putting it out there. So it doesn't matter. I don't think, it doesn't matter who the MEP consultant is, because everyone's got, it's horses for courses. Some are better than certain things than others. It all comes down to, understanding that it's an imperfect world, and if you're not responsible for it as MEP consultant, then you can't really design it fully anyway. And as a builder, we should be, vetting it and checking it. That's the bottom line, really. As politically as I can answer that one, I think. But anyway.
No, that's helpful.
Yeah, I don't know about your experience, Alan, with it, because
I've never heard of an Arup designing a sprinkler system. They might specify it, but they're not actually going to do the detailed design.
No, and I think to put it this way, right? Look, this is how we used to operate back in the days, a long while ago. Is that if you've got a drawing that's put in front of you and the consultant's not warranting the pipe size, then just take it off, because people will go away and try and install it. Because you have to work on the basis that, that design is a big word. It's misinterpreted, and an approximate design isn't, the actual design. So you might have a sprinkler schematic and some stuff on it for tendering purposes. It doesn't mean if you install it, it's going to work.
No, that's the feedback I've had from, the M&E installation companies. That's why people tend to, pretty much throw away the what gets, from a BIM perspective, there's this perception that the BIM model starts and then gets updated through the process, and in practice it doesn't, because nobody that is actually going to rely on the BIM model for coordination and installation will want to use the original consultant's model, because they don't know how it's been built. The there's a misconception in the industry that people take the BIM model and then hand it over and then add to it, whereas actually, certainly from an M&E perspective, they tend to go back to first principles and remodel it.
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody's aware of that, but that's certainly the case.
No, it's the bottom. I mean, look, I mean, I could bore you to death with this, George, but you know, we have problems where architects don't zone the model out at the start. The MEP consultant puts in stuff then which, you know, you can't reference it back to where it's located. And you talk about putting data in it, and you got no hope. So, you know, it's a big cyclical thing anyway that's going on, and they don't, as you say, they'll put pipe work in for sprinklers, but it's just literally probably a very sort of level of detail bit of pipe work, and that is it. It doesn't show bracketry, expansion, anchoring, whatever's going. It doesn't show any of it. You know, that's the reality of it, and it's all down to if you've never seen the BG6, George, I'll send it through to you, but it kind of explains how that phase of design goes through with MEP consultants. It's quite an eye opener. It's a visual document.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, excellent. I think we're covered, aren't we? Yes, I think we are. I've decided. I'm making an executive chairman's decision. We're covered, and we are going to finish 11 minutes early. So thank you very much indeed. This has been quite an eye-opener, and we've got a lot of adjacent information that's going to be actually, I think, as important as the main report. George, have you got anything to add to that?
Only that I'm very pleased with the input that everybody's given. I've learned a huge amount. I hope everybody else has found it useful. Yeah, so yeah, that's all I've got to say. If you've any, what we're doing at the moment, we've got one this afternoon, and that's the finish of the current tranche. We've got another session that we're setting up at the beginning of October. We're just firming up the dates on firefighting lifts and escape. I can't remember, evacuation escapes or whatever.
Evacuation lifts.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Sarah, I took your lead, and I've been in touch with both Otis and Schindler, and they've both put forward people who are willing to help us. So we'll let you know about that. And if there are any other asset types that people think that we ought to be tackling in this method, then please let us know. And
this will be published over the next same month. We've got quite a few to do, and we'll let you know when that comes out. It's an ongoing document. Will never be finished. Things change, and this will change dynamically on an ongoing basis, and so we welcome your ongoing involvement.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Excellent. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Cheers.